I'm not excited, but should I be? Is this the fate that half of the world is planned for me? I know I love you, and you love the sea, but what only water contains a little drop for me. But should I be? Is this the fate that half of the world's planned for me? I know I love you, and you love the sea, but what only water contains a little drop for me.
Jessica has never been to Houston, Texas before. She has never spoken for anybody, AIGA chapter, otherwise, in Houston ever before. So this is a very special night, and I've had a couple of drinks, you're gonna humor me. So, if you watch Conan or Saturday Night Live or whatever, they always, the guest host comes out and they always do their monologue, and then they say, we got a great show for you tonight, so-and-so is here, and just the crowd just freaks out. And of course they've got a big applause sign, so everybody knows how to do that. We don't have one of those, but I'm a band nerd, so I know this is a volume gauge, right? So we're gonna give her a nice, big, loud, rambunctious, sweaty Houston welcome. So here we go. Monologue, monologue, monologue. We got a great show for you tonight. Jessica Hische is here. Awesome. Jessica Hische.
So I have to thank everybody here for coming. This is awesome. So many people. I think we're good. I'm trying to make it so that it doesn't do that. There we go. Because you're just ever so slightly taller than me, and I have tall shoes on right now. I do have to personally thank Ed for diving into the top shelf here and giving me a thing of Macallan 25, which is the fanciest scotch that I've had in some time, because I'm classy, but I also like to drink more than one scotch. So this is actually, oh wait, I'm gonna do a preemptive strike here. I have this new thing that happens sometimes when I talk for a long time and I have to blow my nose at some point. Does anyone have tissues that they will give to me so I don't have to stop and interrupt the thing later on when I have to blow my nose in egress? I do have a napkin here, but I feel like it won't be significant enough. That's okay, I'll do that. I'll get it back to you. We're good. It's a totally weird, I think it has something to do with wheat. Who knows? Everything has to do with wheat these days. I tried to write, for one thing, this is also the first time I'm speaking in Texas. I've been to Texas. I judged the DSBC show up in Dallas, and I know, don't shoot at Dallas that much, whatever. I know, Houston's better, whatever. Everyone knows the order of Texas awesomeness. I've been to Austin, but just for South by Southwest, which really just means that I went to like drink my face off for like an entire week. I was like college drunk the whole time. I went to the airport at 3 o'clock in the morning because I thought I was gonna miss my flight. And it was just like horrible. Like you don't go to conferences with a bunch of Irish people and people from the UK. It's just kind of the worst. It's like 10 a.m. and they're all at the Wicker Man already. It doesn't make any sense. But I wanted to write something really, this is a new talk, so I might be like, oh, that's the slide that's happening now. But I wanted to do something that was a little different for you guys, and I've been kind of on a non-portfolio show talk kick lately because I sort of feel like everyone's tired of hearing me talk about my portfolio over and over again, and I do enough talking now, and there's enough of my shit on the internet that I'm always shoving in your face that I feel like it's fine that I don't do that at a talk. So I've crafted this whole talk around the fact that I am Batman, and that you can also be Batman, and it'll all make sense in a little while. It sounds really weird, but it's like a new life philosophy that I've sort of made up, like today, sort of. I mean, I had the talk done before today, but then I was like, what about this Batman metaphor? And then it all came together. So anyway, if you're not familiar with me and my work, my name is Jessica Hische. It's pronounced Hish, not Hishy or Heish, or all sorts of weird ways that people like to pronounce it. I pronounce it incorrectly according to my German ancestors, and the Germans are very happy to point that out every time that I see them. But then it should be Hische, which sounds way fancy, and I don't want to be one of those people though, that like pronounces things the way that they're supposed to be pronounced, even though I'm American. Like, I will have a croissant, please. You know, like when you go to Starbucks and you do that, everyone's just like, shh. I hope you're okay with cursing. I curse a little bit. I probably won't curse like crazy, because I curse mostly when I'm super duper nervous, and I feel a little loose right now because of this McAllen, so I probably won't curse quite as much as I usually do. Anyway, so I'm a letterer, avid internetter, and cat lady. I was a dog person growing up, but I'm a cat lady now, as people are when they don't currently want children, but want children. When it comes to my career, I'm a specialist, but that certainly doesn't mean that I don't love to mess around and make a lot of other weird stuff. So the real sort of, like, you guys have maybe heard me talk about being a procrastinator before. Procrastinating is my life philosophy. And it all sort of came about long before I said anything about it, because it's sort of how I've chosen my whole life path, is just like doing the things that I feel like doing when I feel like doing them, which sounds really selfish and weird, but it totally makes sense if you get it in the right context. But I was asked by Nick Reyes, who ran this site, Humble Pie, which I think he still runs, but maybe not as actively as he did before. What's one piece of advice that I would give to young people that like wanted to be designers or felt like they were struggling or whatever, people that were graduating from college? And my piece of advice was the work that you do while you're procrastinating is probably the work that you should be doing for the rest of your life, which is really how I chose my major in college. It's how I figure out what I want to do. I don't try and like make a 5-year plan. I make like an afternoon plan. Like this afternoon I feel like doing X. And then I try and take a mental note of like what that X is, and is that an X that I should be doing more often? But a lot of people took this quote and misinterpreted it. I would get all sorts of awesome comments on Twitter, like, so I should play GoldenEye and masturbate forever, you know? And like so much of that, it's outrageous. So, oh my god, I guess I should just sit around and organize my files all day. And I'm like, well, you know, if you get paid to masturbate, you should totally do that for the rest of your life. What can I say? That sounds like a great career. I think many people would like that career. So this whole thing has sort of manifested itself as procrastinating for me. And procrastinating is very different from procrastinating. So these are some of my procrastinating projects. I made a crazy wedding website, which was really not supposed to be crazy. It just ended up being crazy. And I was petrified to design my own wedding invitations, because the second that we announced that we were engaged, everyone in the universe was like, oh my god, your wedding invitations are going to be amazing. They're going to be the best beautiful thing ever. And I was like, ah, you know, and I was like terrified to even get married, because my family is like incredible divorced, like as divorced as humanly possible. And I was like, let's just go and run away and not get married. And then everybody was like, I need to see the insanity that will be your wedding invitations. So instead of me making an insane wedding invitation, I was like, oh, let's make it easier, and I'll just get a bunch of my friends to make artwork and we'll build something around that. And it ended up being the most like intense, crazy thing in the universe, just because when you get 15 friends to make artwork for your wedding invitation, and they're all like pretty talented people, it turns into an insane thing. And then Daily Drop Cap was my biggest first major project, and then the rest of them have been sort of like resources and whatnot that I want to make for people. But, so procrastinating, very different than procrastinating. Procrastinating is to do the work that you feel like doing when you're putting off the work that you don't feel like doing. which is quite different than masturbating. Masturbating would totally fall under procrastinating, which is to put off work by doing unproductive activities, though I guess by nature, masturbating is quite productive. Anyway. So this is and the whole procrastinating thing is really like, it's the reason why I cling to it so much is because of these questions, which I get all the time, because I get them all the time, which means people are dealing with them all the time, which is, how do you avoid creative burnout, and what inspires you to stay motivated when you're not motivated? How do you keep churning out work over and over and over again? And there's sort of like two major things that contribute to that for me. The biggest one is project diversity. Making sure that you have enough going on that's different so that you're not just focusing on the same thing over and over again, because it's really easy to get burned out if you're just doing the same thing over and over again. And the other is to actually make sure I have enough on my plate. One of the easiest ways for me to just like flounder about and stay on Twitter for too long and not do enough stuff is if I actually don't have enough work. So if I have like 1 or 2 projects that I'm working on, it is impossible for me to finish those projects. But if I have like 11 projects, I'm making like every kind of to-do list, my calendar is like blocked out by the hour, I'm hyper productive, I can figure it out, but I need to have enough on my plate. But the key is knowing how much is enough and how much is too much, because you don't want enough on your plate that like looking at your to-do list makes you want to throw up. That's really important. But back to the sort of like project diversity end of it, which I think is sort of the most important, because you figure out how much you need to have on your plate in order to feel productive and whatever. And some people feel really overwhelmed if they have 2 projects, and some people feel really underwhelmed if they have 10 projects. So, but for me, it's sort of figuring out a good balance between this conceptual thinking and the making and the production end. And the thing that you have to realize is that no matter what your professional specialty is, because I love specializing, I think that it's really important to put yourself out there into the world as someone that has a thing that they're good at. Like, we can all be amazing at 100 million things, but if clients think that you're amazing at 100 million things, they won't know what to hire you for. They'll like think about you as being like an awesome person that they'd want to have as a salaried employee to do everything under the sun, but if they can't have you as a salaried employee, they don't know what project to put you on when that happens. So I think the whole like professional specialty is all about how you market yourself in the kind of like paid work that you want to get versus the work that you actually do. And I think that's the thing where there's like the biggest disconnect between like being like a generalist and a specialist, is that I don't know any specialists that do only that thing all the time. Like when you talk to anybody that's like a type nerd or anything like that, if literally the only thing that they do is like type, lettering, and think about type and read about type, they are fucking boring. They're super boring. They have nothing to talk about when they go to like a party and meet non-type people. If you go to TypeCon, you can totally know who in the crowd is the person that only cares about type, because you can talk to them for like 4 minutes and then you have to move on and talk to the person that like has burned through every series on Netflix and actually can talk about pop culture stuff. So what I do for a living, of course, is being a letterer. And while I love lettering, it's not like what satisfies me 100%. So I love it. I should probably define what it is, because there might be some people that don't know what it is. A lot of people know now, because I think I'm like rah, 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 all the time about what lettering is, but and now I go to universities, and when I first started doing a lot of public speaking, everyone would be like, whoa, wait a second, people make the fonts? And now I go around, everyone's like, oh yeah, we do type design in our sophomore year, it's no big deal. And I'm just like, that's crazy, that's like 3 years, and all of a sudden everybody's doing lettering and type in college, it's insane. But the difference between lettering and calligraphy, which not a lot of people can make the distinction, even like I was at a conference in Dublin, and Michael Beirut was on the stage, and he showed a piece of Marion Banshee's work and was like, and this calligraphy, and in the crowd I'm like, that's lettering, you know? So if Michael Beirut can make the mistake, I think we all can. But lettering, the main difference is how it's completed. So lettering is drawing, and calligraphy is writing. And the reason why that makes a huge, huge difference is like what you would hire a letterer for versus what you would hire a calligrapher for. So someone contacted me the other day and was like, hey Jessica, I'm working on this awesome quilt of like the topography of Mount Rainier, and we want to, this is true, I'm not even making this up right now, and they're like, we want to make like the quilt, and we need someone to do these, 40
lettered phrases that we can then embroider into the quilt. And I was like, you know what you need? You need a calligrapher. Because if they tried to hire me to do that, it would be like a year of work and way too much money to make a quilt of the topography of Mount Rainier. So, but calligraphers, what they do is that they'll practice the same techniques over and over again. So it's like when you're a calligrapher, you work with a set of tools that you feel really comfortable in. You work with a pen, you work with a pointed pen, you work with a broad nib pen, you work with a brush, you work with all these crazy Japanese brushes, you work with your hand, who knows. But you're comfortable with that tool, and then you practice over and over and over again until you can perfect those letter forms, so that when so-and-so contacts you and says, I want you to do my wedding stationery, you're like, boom, 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 done. Boom, 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 done. Versus a letterer that's gonna just futz over each Bezier curve or each, like, you know, pencil stroke over and over and over again, because letterers are used to working in a lot of different styles. So while we have more diversity, we're less fast. So if you have a lower budget for a project and a faster turnaround, calligraphers are probably going to better suit you versus a letterer, even though a lot of calligraphers are fairly high budget as well. But lettering can look a lot like calligraphy, which is where the confusion happens a lot of times. So especially a lot of the work that I do can look very calligraphic, but it's not calligraphy. So this was a cover that I did for Beck's recent album, Song Reader, which was really fun because it completely came about randomly because I ran into the art directors at lunch while they were brainstorming about what to do for the cover. And I was like, you should do this. And they were like, do you want to do that? And I was like, totally. So sometimes networking happens because you run into two very awkward art directors out to dinner, out to lunch at like some weird hippie spot in San Francisco. But I'll give you a little insight of the process of some of the ways that I work. I'm going to show two projects, like process start to finish. But other than that, I'll be kind of philosophizing, if that's even a word. So this is another project that is very calligraphic looking. So I did this piece for More magazine. And it was one of those things that I sort of like knew instantly what I wanted to do as soon as I got the project brief. So this is what the final looked like. And I did the main titling and then a little drop cap in there. And when I first got hired, the art director sent me this and said, we're working with Jeff Kern. He's this crazy photographer. I actually think he is Texan. But he does awesome, awesome work. And I saw this and I was like, oh my God. Usually my stuff is paired next to like really not the best photography. Or they're like, oh, you care that it's across from a Cialis ad? Who knew, you know? And so I don't often like look to see what my final work looks like because a lot of times it is just like in some random magazine and like on the page is like some random business dude like pointing his finger at a dollar bill. And but for this I like got this artwork and I knew exactly what I wanted to do because they gave me even this little clue in the corner on the bottom left that they obviously wanted something that was like, you know, had these calligraphic swashes to it, and we talked about it not being like very illustrative in terms of lettering because they didn't want to overpower the actual photography. And she was like, oh, we have all these like little separated pieces that we had him shoot too that we would love to mix into the type, and I got all excited. So these were the sketches that I actually made. I didn't make like really diverse sketches for this project. Usually when I do sketches for something, I'll do like, you know, 2 or 3 really different options so they can choose one and I can move from there. But we had a little bit of a tight turnaround and also like a pretty clear idea of what we wanted to do, so she was completely fine with me keeping it pretty tight and just working with lockups for my sketches. So we ended up choosing, I think this is, yeah, I showed them both with the photography in place so we could choose the lockup. And then this is the one we ended up going for. So this sketch is pretty tight. My sketches generally tend to look like this when I'm done with them, but I'm like not a person that does like lots of iterations of sketches. I draw really, really lightly and really, really loosely on my page, and then I'll like sort of build up from there. So when you look through my sketchbook, I look like a crazy person because it looks like I just draw really great all the time. But it's really, there's just tons of erasing that happens, and I just work really loosely and lightly, like sort of like underpainting kind of stuff, or like when you're doing figure drawing and you make it like really light, but then you draw like the actual figure on top of your really loose gesture drawing. That's sort of how I work when it comes to these sketches. So, and then once I get into vector, I'll lay it down in Illustrator, like so, and then I'll draw some guides on top of it. I tend to not use just like the drag down guides because they go across the whole page and sometimes I don't like that. Or I'll have things that are on an angle or things that are on like an arc or something like that, and those guides, you can probably do that, I just don't know how. As much as I use Illustrator like crazy, I use like the pen tool and like the gradients sometimes, and you know, it's like, it's not a lot, you know, I don't use all the insanity tools. I started using the width tool, which I'll show you in a second because it's really wild. But even then, I'm like not happy with it enough to have that be my final, so I've added this whole new like I've gotten even worse with just like how long it takes me to do stuff. So now I basically do like a vector underpainting, and then I will do another version that's vector where I just trace my vector again to make it better. It's just, I don't know why, I'm just noodling around sometimes. But what I'll do is I will just take a stroke and draw just a stroke down to make the skeleton of the type. And then usually at that point, I like just hide my sketch and I don't look at it anymore. So a big thing for me is I don't like to trace my sketches exactly because I feel like I lose a layer of editing if I do it that way. So like, you know, when you were applying to art school, like your art teacher was like, you can't just trace a photo of a tiger and send that in your portfolio. They know that you weren't there to draw the tiger. You know, that's like a thing, you know, where you like see people's portfolios and it's like, you didn't spend a year in India. I know that you didn't draw these things from life. You're drawing them from National Geographic. And they were like really stressing life drawing. I sort of stress life drawing in my lettering work in that I try not to draw directly like on top of my sketches. I try to use them like as if I'm doing figure drawing of my sketches. So sometimes I'll just put the sketch to the side or have it in front of me and use it as reference while I do my vector drawing separately. And what that does is it gives me this second level of idealizing that happens because, you know, like when you're drawing something, if I'm drawing a picture of you, I'm gonna make you look really awesome when I draw you because everybody always like idealizes people that they try, you know, they smooth out everything, not that you're not perfectly smooth already, but you know, when you're drawing things, you tend to idealize. When you're drawing stuff from memory, you tend to idealize and you tend to focus on the things that, you know, are what you think of when you think of that person. So with my lettering, it's the same way. Like I'll end up, you know, completely forgetting that I made some mistake in my drawing and I'll erase it while I'm doing my vector. So this is what that would end up looking like. And then there it is again. And then next, I will go in and add fix. So I added these with the stroke variation tool and also with drawing shapes on top of my strokes. So when I first started, before they introduced that stroke width tool in Illustrator at all, I would just do everything as a line for my thins and then draw a shape on top of the stroke for my fix. And I still sort of like, I still prefer that because you have more control and you certainly cannot make hyper crazy contrasty stuff with that width tool without just looking terrible vector art. Because there's only so much that you can do, and also you can't set a minimum point width, which is ridiculous. So if you're working with foil stamping or working with anything like that, where like it matters a great deal that it doesn't go below 1 point for your stroke width, I have to go in and just be like, double click, copy paste, double click, copy paste, double click, copy paste, double click. It should like add all the like minimal point widths all over the place. It's really annoying. So this is sort of how the process of that goes if you're not familiar with the tool. I made this little screen video of it. So the tool is over there in that guy, the width tool. It's Command W or something like that. You can actually drag out the strokes to make them thicker and thinner. And then you can double click to type in exact measurements if you want them to be exact. I know you guys your minds are blown right now, right? This has been around since like CS4 or something, nobody knows about it. It's pretty cool, it's super cool. But it's only really useful if you're doing low contrast stuff. So like this is even like pushing it a little bit in terms of like high contrast, low contrast. So yeah, I know, you guys are like, I need to go home now and immediately do this. I don't care about anything else that Jessica says for the rest of the day. So that's what that would sort of look like, right? Okay. So, and you can tell that there's parts that I didn't do that for, like the I and the top of the D. It's like not possible to use that tool there. And for like the counters of those little swashes, I would draw a little shape to fill that in as if like the ink had filled it in or something. And there's what it looks like on top of my sketch. But I'm not totally happy with this. I feel like there's some irregularities in the weight. I feel like it could look a lot nicer. So this is when I would go through and trace over everything and then even it all out and make it look a hell of a lot nicer. So it seems like a subtle difference, but hopefully you guys can see that. I mean, you can see, it's instant, but oh, if you can't see that, don't be a graphic designer. Go home. There's a job for you somewhere. So that's what the final of that type ended up looking like. And then for the summer and for grown-ups, I did not even draw that with the sketch on because I was like, I knew generally what I wanted to look like, but I didn't want to trace it because I knew that whenever I draw anything that's like a sans or a serif, I'm never going to be anywhere near close on my sketch because it's just not possible to draw things that perfectly unless you're Doyle Young and you do that all the time and you have assistants that vectorize everything for you. I am not that person. So my sketches for those are really quite far off. And then after that, drop in that stuff, add all my swashy junk, and then it's done. So yeah, woo. So that's pretty much like my process. And like I add extra steps all the time to make it perfect, even though like people won't notice it except for me. But I notice it like crazy, and then it will like ruin me inside forever if I don't fix it. Like now I've been licensing my drop caps a little bit more now, finally. It's been like 3 years, but I go back into all that artwork and I'm just like, oh my God, I could not send them this as it is. I drew that 3 years ago, it's totally janky. So I had to like go through and spend like 2 weeks just like fixing vector artwork within my drop caps because I'm crazy and that's what people do. But it's worth it in the end because like you'll be so much happier with yourself later because you know how like you look at work that you did 2 years ago and you're like, that's ridiculous and I can't believe I did that. I'm terrible at everything. And if you're continually going in and making it better, you're like, I'm so awesome. Look at how awesome I am. And it's just because you corrected all of your bad mistakes from the past. And that's something too that like I think that I have a giant portfolio online because I like need to share everything with everyone ever. And but if I didn't actually go back and fix some of my earlier mistakes, I'd be too embarrassed to keep that work up there. So it's not necessarily a true testament to what some of the work originally looked like in print. Because I needed to make it look better now and have it fall in with the rest of my work. And then the next project that I will show, I'm showing 3 projects. I thought I was only showing 2, I was showing 3. Because I had to show one that was like super, like not very conceptual. This is like a little bit conceptual in that, you know, I knew that I wanted to hearken to this like era with the type because of that crazy hairstyle and whatnot. But this project is super conceptual, and it's weird because a lot of people do not perceive it to be that way. Because people look at this series, which is a series that I'm doing with Penguin right now, called Penguin Drop Caps. I'm doing 26 books, which is a shit ton of books to do covers for. And I have to read them. I try to read most of them, but they assigned me Moby Dick and Swan's Way in the same 6-week period, which was not possible to read. And, but I do try and read as much as I can, because when you're trying to capture the feeling of a book and like the concepts within a book in a very abstract way, as in just like one letter, it's kind of impossible if you're not familiar with the material. So when a lot of people ask me like, where do you find your inspirations? You know, that's like a big question that you get asked all the time. And what people are actually asking is, where do you find your influences? Which is really like, what library do I go to? You know? And for me, my biggest inspiration isn't like some huge library of vintage typey stuff that I have. It's the content that I'm designing for. And that should be the case, because if it's not the case, you're a decorator. You're a decorator if you're not looking to your content to come up with a good concept, and if the content itself isn't the thing that's influencing you the most as you're completing something. So this series is super fun and really difficult. One, because I have to like encapture so much about these books that everybody loves. Like some people that love these books love these books. And so you have an audience that will be very judgmental if you do not get it right. And then also, you know, I will be judgmental of myself if I don't make it look good. But they're super fun to do. And the Bronte Jane Eyre one was maybe like that's my favorite book I think I've ever read. That book is like reading television. There's so much shit that happens. If you are a lover of plot, you will love Jane Eyre. I have found out that I am not much of an Austen girl. I know that there's probably a bunch of you in the crowd because so many women are obsessed, and many men as well. But there's just not enough going on in Jane Austen. There's a lot of conversations, and I just lose interest. I know it's beautiful, and I'm stupid for saying that, whatever. But I love Dickens, I love Bronte, I love anything where there's like, you know, oh my God, it's a story. I love to read stories. And I think that's just because I spend so much time like being brainy and in my head that when I read, I love it to just be like a big escapist thing. I could have read Harry Potter like 1 billion times, and I certainly have seen all of the movies at least 4 times. Because my husband hasn't read the books yet, because he didn't want to read the books, because everyone always says that the books are better than the movies, so whenever there's a movie made of a book, he watches the movie first, so that he likes the movie for what it is, and then reads the book later and is like, yes, that is true. Otherwise, you hate the movie, so it's sort of smart, right? I actually started a book club with some friends of mine in which we were only gonna read books that were then made into movies. So it just meant actually that we just watched a lot of Stanley Tucci movies, because apparently he stars in all movies that are made after modern books. Which is, I mean, really it was like Lovely Bones, Hunger Games, like every single, also like not good movies or books, not necessarily. Lovely Bones was pretty good. Hunger Games was actually really good, but totally not in a very different way. So the way that I approach these is that when I read, I'm a big fan of making word association lists. That's like pretty much how I do all of my brainstorming, and I don't do any like fancy mind maps where you make it look pretty and like all whatever beautiful mindy. I just write down any word that comes to mind, and I let my brain just be completely weird and say anything that I feel like. So this is not anywhere close to like the amount of things that I would write down after reading Lord of the Flies. I would literally write things down about my friends or something that came into my mind, like, you know, Jennifer. Like, what about Jennifer? It captures that book to me. But then from that, I can sort of like draw conclusions of like, why did I think that thing? You know, what is it about that thing that is, you know, a very concrete visual thing versus the more like abstract mood thing that I can do to come up with like sort of a weird concept. And see, these were some of the sketches that I did this was for Lord of the Flies. So I had this big thing with the sharp on both ends, the stick that's sharp on both ends that just seemed so like malicious to me. So I really wanted to have this like stake going through the G that was sharp on both ends, and there's all this fire that happens, and of course there's the conch that they call from. But ultimately the one that won out, which I'm really stoked about, because every single person that has been to art school, that has been to graphic design school, has tried to do this. A G that is glasses, a lowercase g that's glasses. If you haven't done this, I applaud you, and I also question you, because we all did this. We all tried to do that logo that was a G that was glasses, and we all failed at it miserably, but somehow this got approved. That's awesome. And then for James Joyce, it was a similar thing. So it was Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. There's all these themes in it. It's very much about being Irish. It's very much about like religion and abandoning religion, or, you know, religion versus, you know, what you want in this lusty way. So the idea that I loved the most was actually this like J that was made up of rosary beads that were just sort of like splaying apart, but I couldn't get them to get on it in terms of like how it would come across visually. Like they were like, oh, I don't think it'll have enough visual weight on the thing. So I ended up just going for like the Irish route and did one that was like just straight up super Celtic, which was really fun because it was pretty much the equivalent of digital knitting. So I just had to sit there and be like, cut, cut, paste above, cut, cut, paste above, cut, cut, paste above, for like 11 hours or something ridiculous. But that's part of my job that I actually really like to do. I think that it was something that it took me a long time to embrace, because I had a lot of very conceptual illustrator friends that, you know, did all this super dark stuff and always got hired for really smart novels and stuff like that. And I was like, you know, drawing penguins in bathing suits, and they're like, it's a story about an elderly couple that are reunited because of their dog, you know, and I'm like, you know, and like my 22-year-old self that wanted to be all deep and stuff was getting all mad about it. But really, like, the thing that I love to do the most is to make, so why not? You know, why not just embrace the fact that like I can digitally knit a J and have a ton of fun doing it. And still be very conceptual. Like I might not be doing this like insanely dark work all the time, or doing something that like makes people reevaluate their lives, but I am doing stuff that I'm looking to the content for the concept, and that's important to me. And then the other differentiation between lettering, so I talked about lettering versus calligraphy, but lettering and type design are very, very, very different. So everyone knows fonts because they have a computer and fonts are there. And also your graphic designers, and fonts are your lifeblood, basically. But people do make the fonts, and many of the fonts that you have on your computer were made by people that are still alive and well. And the main difference between lettering and type design is that type design, you create a system of letters versus lettering it's basically like a one-off piece of artwork that is not meant to be rearranged. So people write me all the time and say, can I get the V from that alphabet? And I'm like, doesn't exist. I didn't draw that. I don't draw alphabets for everything. And then type designers have to deal with all kinds of other questions like, how do I unzip a file? And like, I downloaded it onto my iPhone, but the fonts aren't showing up in Illustrator. It's really fun. And it's really like, it's so much more like being like an IT person and also like being like an engineer. You know, you have to figure out how to make this piece of software that has to work in just the worst conditions under the sun. It has to work with people that don't understand how to use computers because they all buy fonts too. And it has to work on Windows, it has to work on Mac, it has to work on old computers. And really just building stuff that is going to be that structurally sound is very, very difficult. So whenever you use a typeface and don't notice any problems with it, it usually means that someone spent months to years working on it. So a typeface that, I don't do a ton of type design work because it's incredibly labor intensive. And it's really hard to get myself in the zone to do it, mostly because I have ooh shiny syndrome all the time and I'm just looking away and I can't get stuff done. But I did work on type work for Moonrise Kingdom, Wes Anderson's most recent film. So the way that process went is, one, I had a conniption when they hired me and basically did jumping jacks for an entire year. And I also didn't think that it was gonna actually really happen or be real because a lot of times when these projects do come along, they can feel too good to be true, and things get killed super late in the game all the time when it comes to design work. So there's a lot of stuff that I've worked on that I've been able to share because our directors have let me do that, but it never saw the light of day, or stuff that I was just like, my whole heart was in, and then it got shot down because some person didn't like the color blue or something like that. And this was one of those projects where they totally paid me to develop the whole thing, but it's not like they were throwing like Scrooge McDuck buckets of money at me. I was like, they could walk away from this at any point and feel like they haven't wasted money. So until like 2 days before they were launching the Apple trailer, I just didn't believe it was actually gonna happen. But this is how the process went. So they originally were looking at Edwardian script to use it for the film. And Edwardian script is beautiful, and it was drawn by Ed Van Gat, who's like the most outrageously awesome, weird, uncle dude you would ever meet in your whole life. He's like super New Yorky and says random things all the time and has these really intense 70s glasses and a walker and just randomly repeats himself. He's awesome. He's super great. And he's also the dude that did all the type and lettering or phototype stuff in the 70s, so you've totally seen all of his stuff everywhere. And so it was kind of a big task to take something that was his and make it into something that worked for the film. So their original thing that they were thinking is, this is way too light, it feels too formal, we have to figure out a way to make it feel less formal and make it work in shitty screen conditions. So the first thing to do was to just deformalize it a little bit, make it feel a little less wedding-y, which I did here. And then after that, they were like, okay, well the weight doesn't feel quite right, let's try a couple things. So I beefed it up quite a bit up top, and then I tried this cool version that was totally mono weight, which I actually super dig, and I want to make a new typeface later, so we'll see about that. But then I didn't hear anything for a little while. And I should clarify too that I wasn't working with a film agency or wasn't working with an ad agency that was hired by the team. I was just straight up working with the producers and Wes Anderson. So one of the producers, Molly Cooper, was my main contact, and when we first started working together, she would just forward me emails from Wes, or call me and say, well, Wes thinks that R is too weird, and I'm like, okay. And then when we got knee deep into the project, it was just him emailing me, and I would be like, I don't quite understand what you're talking about, can you send me a sketch? And then he would send over a doodle on a piece of paper, but it was always a TIFF for some reason. And he's also one of those accidental all caps people for sure. So there was a lot of like accidental all caps emails. But anyway, I hadn't heard back from a while, and I was like, oh, they're gonna kill the project, I haven't heard back. And then I got this email that was like, you know, I don't think it's quite right. I was looking at these titles from this French film from Claude Chabrol, and think that this is more in the zone. It's from the 40s, you know, and I was like, oh man, totally that works. Because I was struggling too before we even started with the Edwardian script, because the movie is set in the early 60s, but all the scripts that were coming out in the 50s and 60s are brush scripts, which are like way too wacky for this movie. Like he's not a wacky, he's like a quirky, not a wacky, you know? And especially like 1962 in New England, they weren't wacky. New England's not a wacky place, you know? So when he showed me this, I was like, the 40s totally works. You know that people in New England in the 60s were still totally using stuff from the 40s. That makes sense to me. So I did this study then, and then he was like, I love it. The only feedback I have is, can the M look like this M? And this is actually like, this was the TIFF that I got in my email from Wes Anderson. I was like, where did you find that, and why is it a TIFF, you know? If it was on the internet, it wasn't a TIFF, you know? It doesn't make any sense. So then the title evolved into this, which was good. And then he was like, great, move forward, we gotta get a bunch of stuff done now, let's go. So when they originally hired me, they hired me to do lettering for these beginning names in the beginning of the movie, and then a typeface for the end credits. But because I ended up having to typeset so many names in the beginning, it was like 15 names or something like that, I had enough of a character set that when they came to me and were like, oh, it's cool, we'll just pick out another typeface to use on all the posters, I was like, no, give me an extra 2 weeks, I can make a second typeface. So I ended up making a display weight and a text weight of the same typeface. And it's actually like a little weird to say display and text, because it's this typeface is super cool because it's an optically weighted script, which is something that there's not any of those. I think there's very few, because when you think about optical weights, so optical weights in type means that you get typefaces that are different weights, but they're not meant to be different weights. They're just meant to like work in different conditions to make them all feel like they're the same weight. So a lot of times you'll get these typefaces that they'll come in like different optical weights, and one's for use on like super shitty newsprint paper, and it's lighter, so then when it bleeds, it gets a little heavier. And then the other one's meant to be used on really nice paper, and then when you see them next to each other, they look the same. So in this case, the display was just meant to be used bigger than the text. So when you see them set at the right size together, they look like they're the same weight. So it's like super nerdy, for sure. And, but I love that, and now I'm really into it. Now I want to make all kinds of optically, whatever. And so the main difference between them, which you can see pretty instantly because of how wide text weight is compared to display weight, is that the letter width on the text is a lot wider. There's a lot more space between the letters, and the X height's a lot higher. So you guys know that, you know, the higher X height equals more legible, and that's just because you can set a typeface a lot smaller and it looks a lot bigger. And then you have more, like, you don't have to worry about this like jumpy big caps like interrupting your reading. So the X height's higher, there's more space between the letters, and the contrast between the weight in the letter is a lot less. So that's why when you see like Georgia or something and you blow it up to be like 10 inches high, it looks totally horsey and weird, because it was never meant to be that big. So text faces, you know, if they're meant to be used in a lot of different conditions, they'll come with a display weight that's meant to be used bigger. And sometimes it's kind of hard to tell the difference between them, but it's usually a contrast thing. So this is what they look like together. You can totally see how the text looks heavier. And it's just because it's set at the same size and it's not meant to be. And then here's how they looked on some of the stills, which I was really pumped about. Also the Bill Murray one is awesome, because Bill Murray's amazing. And then this is how the end credits look. They did such awesome stuff with like animating the end credits, so they came in and they made them all crazy colors, which was really fun. So when I was actually in the theater and saw it for the first time, I lost my mind and was like squealing like a child. But I also had to write, I didn't have to send it, but I had to write this super intense email to Wes Anderson, because originally I did not intend the whole end credits to be set in the script, because I feel like too much script is like not that legible. So I had the names of the characters set in in like an engraver's Gothic kind of typeface, like something from the 20s that felt like it had a little bit of personality, but not too much, and extended sans that would like pair well with it. And then but they weren't into it, and Wes was like, what about Helvetica? And then I was like, like gasp into my computer. Like, if you know me, I'm not the I'm not the hugest Helvetica fan. I like Helvetica, but I don't get like the fetishism over it. And also, if you've ever used it, Helvetica only works with Helvetica. Like, it like pairs amazingly with itself. And other than that, it's like kind of impossible to design with. So I had this like very respectful but very long email that I drafted to be like, we cannot do this, you cannot force my hand, but in like the most like, I love you way, you know? So, but I never had to send it. Before I said anything, they were like, oh, let's just set the whole back with it. And I was like, okay, sort of, yay. That works, good enough. So I was working in FontLab at the time, but I'll show you screenshots from FontLab and from RoboFont, which is a new program that I'm working in now, because the version of FontLab that I have doesn't work on Lion. So I had to switch on like just completely by accident. But everyone sort of bitches about FontLab, so why not? Sounds like a good excuse. So it started off really small, so this is basically what I had for just the display when I set the titles originally, the beginning ones, and then as I built it out, started adding more and more characters. And now recently, I got all inspired to work on it because I had a deal worked out with them where a year after the film was released, I could release the typeface commercially, so you guys can all buy this when I'm done with it, which is really fun. But it's like, there's so much more work to do in terms of when you make a typeface for like designers that you can tell them when they're making mistakes, like one-on-one, and just be like, oh, I noticed that you don't have the open type features turned on, you should do that. But, you know, if you're gonna release something into the world and anyone's gonna buy it, you can't do that. So I have to really idiot-proof it before I can send it out. And also I have to add in all the insane accented characters that you would never think even exist. Like there's an R with a Sadia underneath it. Did you know that? I know that now. There's like so many Hungarian and Croatian and Polish and Icelandic and all these accented characters that you don't have to do it, but if you don't do it, you get emails about it. And like almost everything that I make in terms of my resources is to avoid getting emails from people, pretty much. Like I want to get the nice ones that say, hey, great job, and not the ones that are like, how do you do that thing again, you know? So I make a thing that's like, oh, go to here, and that's how you do that thing, and then I never have to answer that email again. I've also been updating a lot of the characters that I wasn't super happy with before, so I'll show you, like, if you have very good vision, I could show you here. I don't have a laser pointer, so I'm going to run over and point at it. So that would be a Esset, or a German double S, and the original one I don't like as much. See if you could spot it. It'd be kind of hard for me to even find it on there. Wait, I see it. No, I don't. It's hidden. Anyway, it looks like a B. It's not as good. Now it's good. Now it's good. Excited about it. So anyway, designing type is super different from designing lettering, of course, because you're drawing systems, you're drawing each letter individually, but then you have to see them all together. And also you have to be way more conscious of where your vector points go. And that's just sort of like for like rendering on screen and stuff like that. You can't just like have your random vector points all over the place because it just looks like crap. If you shrink it down. That's why sometimes when you're looking at stuff and like you're like zoomed out and it looks different than when you're zoomed in, it's because like the points are rendering weird. So for type design, you want to always plot your points on the extrema of the letter whenever possible, which means the extreme north, south, east, and west of the letter. So you can see where the points are here, so that they're always like on the north, south, east, and west whenever possible. Of course, there's going to be instances when that doesn't work, like on the swash coming off the O. And the way that you can find where the extrema is that you draw little boxes around your letters. So you can see that all those points hit wherever the box hits around that letter. And the reason why this is important is for like rendering and also so that you can take advantage of really cool plugins and stuff for these font programs later. If you want to do like multiple masters and then interpolate all the weights in between. That's how you see those typefaces that have like 4 billion weights to them. They don't draw all 4 billion weights. They draw like 5 weights and then interpolate between all those weights to get an enormous set of weights. But you can't do that if your points are placed in the wrong places. So, and it's kind of hard to like wrap your head around because you would sort of think that the points go here when you look at it and you visualize it, because you're like, oh, that's the top and that's the side, it's just going like this, you know? But that's not how you do it. You plot them like that. And then the next stage with doing type design stuff is actually doing spacing strings and figuring out spacing. So drawing type, the space is just as important as the actual letter itself. It can completely change the texture of type and how everything looks and how legible it is. So you do this thing where you just go A, B, A, C, A, D, A, D, and you go through the entire alphabet and do it that way, and then just look at it a lot. And then if you see, if you see any major mistakes, sometimes you have to completely redo letters because you notice that over and over again the same thing is happening or the same thing is crashing. Or you'll notice things that are sort of not possible to fix, especially with scripts, to get it really, really smooth. So if you look at the BX and the BZ, that's just got to be a ligature because otherwise there's like no real way to get them tight enough together, so you have to draw a ligatured character there to get those to look awesome. But I'm not going to draw one because when do you ever see a B and a Z next to each other? And then someone from Hungary writes me and says, my name is Bazanznik, you know? I'm like, I hate everyone. And then after that, you do all this really fun open type programming to actually say when everything's going to happen. So if you didn't actually know this, if you buy a typeface that has .otf at the end, chances are there's some cool little stuff that happens in the typeface, and if you turn on that feature, it'll happen. So for this one, there are contextual alternates that happen so that at the end of a word, there's not like this really long stroke, it's a shorter stroke if the letter happens at the end of a word, and that's what this is all saying. So it's saying, you know, sub R that ends in not defined space, period, comma, colon, semicolon, bullet, ellipsis, hyphen, by R dot end. So anytime that it falls into those things, put that R dot end character instead. So this is super tedious, for sure, and it's something that not everybody does, but it's really, it will make or break a typeface, especially a script one. So anyway, okay, back to the meat of stuff. So I love lettering and type, but they don't make me 100% creatively satisfied. Lettering is amazing, but you're working with really strict project briefs, there's less problem solving a lot of times. You're hired to play your greatest hits a lot, so there was like a whole year in which all I did was draw lettering that looked like ribbon, just tons of ribbon lettering. You deal with occasionally shitty copywriting. People send you just the most amazingly shitty copywriting, and I'm like, I can't believe you have a job writing this. And then I have to draw it and spend like 8 hours staring at their shitty copywriting, which is really fun. And there's not a ton of control how final printed stuff looks. Collaboration is only on like kind of a client level instead of being on a team, like when you're working somewhere. And then you also feel a little like non-altruistic and that you should be like being a nurse and doing something helpful to people because all I'm doing is like making stuff pretty. But that's like a greater philosophy issue, not like a problem with lettering. And then, and I love type, but it's fucking time consuming. No one wants to pay for it. No one knows how to install fonts on their computers, and it's super fucking time consuming. So here are the things that I love to do and about what percentage of my time that it takes up. So I love lettering, and it's most of my client work is lettering. I don't do as much illustration anymore as I used to, and I love type design, but if I'm gonna do it, I just have to go head first into it because it's really hard to fit in when you have other stuff happening. I do a lot of web design just because all of my side projects involve me doing a lot of web work, plus I am like, there is such a kindred thing between type design and web design. It's like the same personality to do both. So I could just endlessly clean up CSS and figure out how to make some PHP thing work and Google JavaScript stuff, and it's really fun for me. And I love doing writing, but I'm really bad at the process of writing, so I only do it every so often when I'm feeling like sort of masochistic or something. It takes me forever. I feel like I'm like having food poisoning, getting something out of my system when I'm writing. And then public speaking I love doing for sure, it is like, doesn't quite pay the bills, but I love doing it. I love talking to people. I'm probably gonna talk way over time tonight because I just am on a tangent all the time. But everything, I can divide everything from what I do into like what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, and what I'm doing when I'm making. And I try to find like a balance that works for me in terms of thinking and making. So I took everything that I love to do and I plotted it on this scale to see where it all fell. And most of what I like to do falls on the making scale, which makes sense. I'm a maker. I love making stuff. My happiest moment is that like time in the afternoon when you're working on something for 5 hours and you realize that the music went off 4 hours ago, and you're like, wait, what? It's dark out. I don't understand, you know? I love that moment. And I think that it's really important, but it's also important that I don't only do that, because if I only did that, my making work would suffer and my brain would atrophy. So it's really important that even no matter how much you specialize, you still have to like pay attention to the other parts of you that need tending to. In other words, you have to Batmanify yourself. Back to the Batman. So diversify your interests and let the work that pays the bills enable you to do the work that doesn't. So Batman is Bruce Wayne, and Bruce Wayne is Batman. Bruce Wayne pays the bills. Bruce Wayne is a successful businessman. Batman is a masked vigilante. He does the fun work, not unlike your junior designer position, in which you have to pay the bills and you mostly organize things and have too many bosses, and then your fun nighttime stuff in which you're a design illustrator and you take on very different work and you initiate side projects and it's really fun. And the reason why it's really important to have these two things is, one, it's nearly impossible to get all of your career happiness out of client work, because no matter how awesome your clients are, even if you're working for Wes Anderson, there's going to be moments when you want to pull your hair out because they're like, you know, you don't have proper perspective on your work, or something goes south, or something doesn't get produced, and then you feel like you devoted half of your life to this one thing and then now no one's going to see it. And then also, it's nearly impossible to work for 16 hours on one thing and not lose steam. So a big thing that I hear from people is that they have a really hard time going home after their day job and finding any motivation to work when they're at home. And the big thing that I found with that is that people try to do the same thing that they do at their day job when they go home at night. And if you do something very, very different, it doesn't feel like you're working for 16 hours straight. It feels like you're working for 8 hours and then working for 8 hours. Which sounds totally crazy, but it's like a psychological thing. It's in the same way like if you work on the weekend, right? Say you work on a Saturday and you work from 9 in the morning on Saturday until 2 in the morning on Saturday. You are just that motivated to work. But you're working on all different things. Maybe in the morning you go to the coffee shop and you work for 4 hours, and that's kind of enjoyable. And then you go to your office and you work for like 5 hours, and then you go over someone's house and you work for a couple hours, then you go home and you work in front of the TV for a couple hours. You've just worked a 16-hour day, but you feel like you've worked 5 4-hour days. Slightly 4 4-hour days. I'm awesome at math. So I think that embracing the Bruce Wayne and the Batman and knowing that they can be different is important. And also, like, Bruce Wayne was a total dick before Batman, right? Like, Bruce Wayne was just this, like, rich dude, went to galas, was kind of like, you know, he was one of those guys you wouldn't be friends with. Yeah, absolutely. And then as soon as he made Batman, all of a sudden he started getting all philanthropical and started being, like, appealing to the ladies that were the smart ladies. And also, like, Batman can't exist without Bruce Wayne, because where would all those gadgets be? Like, Batman is nothing without his gadgets. He needs Bruce Wayne. So you, Miss I want to be a freelance designer, you need your Bruce Wayne day job to support your Batman nighttime, for sure. And for me, I still have that, you know, now, because I have my Bruce Wayne is my lettering, which pays the bills, but I have a ton of fun doing it. Bruce Wayne has a pretty good life. I mean, he like just hangs out in a mansion and goes to galas and people think he's awesome. Hey, endless chandelier mirror thing happening right here. And then my Batmandom is my making of weird side projects. So I could not make all my weird side projects if I wasn't able to financially support them with my Bruce Wayne day job of being a letterer. And it all sort of feeds into each other in the same way that, like I said, how like Bruce Wayne was a dick before Batman because they like need each other in order to be good. And, like each side like evens it out. It's in the same way with this like pays the bills versus fun work. You know, you can totally be doing fun work that also pays the bills. But if you're not doing them simultaneously, you don't get this awesome vicious cycle that happens where you are doing like work that pays the bills, which enables you to do side projects, which makes you feel good about work that pays the bills, enables you to do side projects, makes you feel excited about work that pays the bills. So then you end up like, all the time about all the work that you're doing, and that's awesome. And I also think it's like a girl's gotta get paid. You know, sometimes I think there's not enough, people aren't talking openly enough about the fact that money can be a lovely motivating factor. And I think that people think of it as this evil thing, and we should all be like, oh, well, I would do it if no one was paying me. Absolutely, you would be, but you wouldn't be able to do it for very long. You know, Batman would be a very shitty crime fighter if he had just a slingshot, you know? So, yeah, exactly. Bruce Wayne needs endless cash to fund a crime-fighting side project, exactly. So I think it's okay to embrace the fact that you need to make money because you have all these weirdo, zany things that you want to do. Sometimes you want to make this crazy 4-color holographic foil stamp thing with rainbow edge painting that's going to cost $4,000, but you want to do it, so that happens. And just always try and find, like, we all try and hope for this thing where like the work that you love to do and the work that pays the bills is like the same. And I think that that's absolutely something to strive for, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the same thing. You know, you can be doing work that pays the bills that's really fun and work that you love to do that's really fun, and they don't have to be the same thing. You can do diverse work. So of the work that I love to do, this is the work that pays the bills. Of course, web design and writing does not pay my bills, and public speaking sort of pays the anti-bills. It's like negative money, but I love it. That's why I'm here. And I think that knowing that work that pays the bills and the fun work don't have to be separate. Like, you can have fun in both things is really important. But one of the other things that you hear all the time, I hear all the time because I go to a lot of conferences, is like, you should quit your job and just do what you love all the time. And I think that that is a thing that people could do, but I think that it's not practical to tell all people that don't have that as an option that they should just like, oh, whatever, you're working at a corporation and that sucks. It's like, there's probably parts of working at a corporation that sucks, but there's parts that are totally enjoyable. So I think that instead of saying like, what do you love to do and quit your job and do that, you have to look at like, what do you actually love doing, but not what do you love, like what's the one thing that I want to quit my job for and do forever. It's more like, what about the work that you're currently doing do you love, and let that influence what you're doing. And this is where the whole procrastinating thing really comes into play. Like, look at your job. You might hate your job 90% of the time, but there is 10% of the time that you love your job. What can you do to get your boss to let that 10% take up more of your day? And then all of a sudden, you only 50% hate your job. And then after a while, maybe you only 75%, or you only 25% hate your job. It was going in the negative there for a second. That was... Woo! But I've tried to take this for like every single thing that I do, and that's how I've ended up in this really weird specialty, is that I was always looking at what I was doing and figuring out what it is about that thing that I love and what can I do to do more of that. So Tiny Jessica was like, drawing is awesome. So Tiny Jessica did a lot of drawing, and I did a lot of really weird, meticulous drawing of shiny things, as people do, I guess. And that led me to go to art school, in which I did a bunch of painting of shiny things. And then I realized I was terrible at painting, and I ended up taking a design class, and then I was procrastinating from all of my painting work in order to do graphic design. And then while I was doing graphic design, I was procrastinating from all of the actual graphic design work to do the illustrations on the graphic design projects. And then I was working for Louise and doing a bunch of logos, but what I was really interested in was the lettering in the projects. So then I started doing a bunch of lettering, and then the lettering is the thing that I like to do the most. But then I noticed that I was feeling like anxiety about not writing and not like expressing myself in other ways, so I made my procrastinating projects, which made me feel anxiety about the fact that I wasn't diving in deep enough to the type world, so I started doing more type design projects. And then we end up with today, where drawing is awesome again. So. Your career definitely evolves and your tastes evolve, and you have to think of it's like a health regime, but for like your career. You know, like you don't just go to the gym and just lift one weight with one arm forever. You would end up with a huge beefy arm. You need to like be holistic about it and do it all together. So do what you love and do it as much as you can. Don't worry about what other people tell you that you should love or what fancy titles like dictate things. Like, you know, sometimes being a title is important to some people, but there's a lot of very unsexy titles that could be very, very fun for you. And you just have to figure out what about the day-to-day stuff it is that you want to do and just embrace it and just tell everyone to fuck off that thinks that your career is not sexy. And then, and do what you want to feel creatively satisfied or at least challenged. Like, I think it's, a lot of people are like, are you creatively satisfied? And a bunch of people are like, never, I'm never satisfied. I'm pretty satisfied. I am creatively satisfied, and I feel like I challenge myself, and I feel like there are some days when I hate life and I think that all my work is shit. That's usually when Eric's in the office. But there are other days where I feel really good about the work that I'm doing. And then, of course, embrace both your inner Bruce and your inner Batman. Just because you want to be like this insane designer that makes crazy, thought-provoking work doesn't mean that you should feel bad about doing work that pays the bills, that helps you do that other work. So, yeah, that's all. Thank you.